I don't think I will be answering your question on what is development, because I come from an institution whose mandate is macroeconomic stability. So you can pose that question to people coming from the bank, and they will answer it for you.
Thanks, Sanjay.
Or we can discuss that after the meeting. I'm going to take up some of these issues you've raised, but going specifically to the references to the book, because I think your book is full of a lot of inaccuracies and misstatements. And in doing so, I will just pick up. I don't have enough time to go through, all the issues that are there, but I'll pick up 6 or 7 key points. First point, which is there's a theme which sort of runs through the book. You don't, as you said in the beginning, you're not saying the fund was responsible for directly cutting spending, but indirectly led to reduction in spending on health and other social sectors. And this assertion clearly is not correct. If you look at the independent reports that have been done by Center for Global Development, which is on health, it didn't say that the fund programs cut the spending. If you look at the evaluation of the 2004 independent evaluation on fiscal adjustments in IMF supported programs, that also concluded that during the program period, and with other factors being the same, public spending on health and education on average increased in relation to GDP compared to the situation without the program. So there is clear indication there. And look at the more recent data that we put together for this meeting from 2000 to 2006 shows that health and education spending increased on average by 0.6% during this period in the fund-supported programs. And the recent programs that have been adopted in many of the low-income countries during 2008-2009 have sought to preserve or increase social spending in the aftermath of the financial crisis. And some programs have even sought to preserve such spending through certain floors. And I should note that these numbers that I'm giving to you exclude externally financed spending on health that is outside the budget. And that amount is pretty significant. I just reviewed a paper which is coming out in Lancet, where they estimate the numbers on the externally financed health spending, which is outside the budget, and the numbers are huge. So we should not just be looking at the government spending and excluding the spending which is outside the budget. Second, you didn't mention it, but you do talk about it in the book, is the issue of wage bill ceilings. First, I want to be absolutely clear that they've never been imposed on education and health sectors as part of the fund conditionality. And then what is overlooked by some of the people is that these ceilings could have been incorporated into the programs at the best of the country officials because they lacked effective mechanism to control wage and employment growth. It's a very crude instrument. They don't know how many people work for them. They are ghost workers. So this is the only thing they know how to control. And I can give you a number of examples. In last meeting that we had with the ministers, there were a couple of ministers who said, we asked for this wage bill ceiling as part of the program. And so, but anyway, the point is, it's not something which comes from us, it also comes from there. Now this was a history. Under the new policy implemented by the fund 3 years ago, the wage bill ceilings are to be used only in exceptional cases when justified by macroeconomic considerations. They have to be deployed only for a limited duration and accommodate scaled-up aid in education and health sectors. And what is interesting now to note is that currently there are no wage bill ceilings as performance criteria in fund programs. And there are only 2 countries which have them as indicated targets, Moldova and Burundi. That's it. There are no other countries which have this. Third, this was the underlying theme behind what you said, that the fund-supported programs, and that's the number given in your book, try to keep the fiscal deficit targets below 3% of GDP. Now, I don't know where you got your numbers from, but fiscal targets, I picked up the recent programs, and I see that they vary widely depending on the country's circumstances. Actual fiscal deficits, excluding grants in 2008, varied from 2.6% of GDP to 23.5% of GDP. And the program targets for 2009 varied from 4.1% to 44.3% of GDP. The argument that deficit targets are rigid and inflexible is inconsistent with the finding of three evaluations, including that of the Government Accounting Office that came out in November 2009. The GAO study notes that budget deficit targets have been applied flexibly in cases such as Liberia, where the target was increased to accommodate higher investment spending financed by concession loans. Furthermore, most programs have accommodated larger deficits during the food and fuel crisis, and the numbers are there in the papers produced by the IMF, as well as in the programs that were implemented in the context of the recent global financial crisis. As I said earlier, these targets have also been designed to counter economic cycles and preserve or increase social spending. Out of the 19 programs initiated in 2008-2009, 16 have budgeted higher social spending. Fourth, now this is again something which is implicit and is connected to my previous point, which is on the inflation. It is not correct that the IMF is pushing inflation down in its programs to levels which are not consistent with literature. A conclusive answer to this question has been provided by the 2009 GAO report, and I'm going to quote 3 sentences from that report. For low-income countries, and I'm quoting from there, empirical evidence generally suggests inflation is detrimental to economic growth after it exceeds a critical threshold of approximately 5 to 12%. This threshold is broadly consistent with the inflation target of 5 to 10% in 31 IMF supported programs we reviewed. End of quote. This is coming from the GAO report. It is therefore disingenuous to argue that inflation targets in some funds programs have entailed the cost of economic growth. Fifth, the issue of do the programs prevent countries from spending aid? In practice, how much aid a country can absorb and spend in a year depends on a number of considerations, including the timing, project cycle, and the capacity of the country to implement the aid finance projects. On average, 70% of the aid increases the program to absorb, and more than 80% is programmed to be spent over the 2 years. This suggests that aid receiving countries do not necessarily spend in the same year, because what they're doing is they are spending expenditures, they're smoothing expenditures in face of volatile aid flows. This makes perfect sense. After all, the governments have to ensure the schools and hospitals are funded over time than for just 1 year. Sixth, the dominant theme of the book is on increasing health spending. We all know that this is not enough to achieve health outcomes, which are sensitive to both institutional and governance considerations. And we know there is ample evidence that public spending does not reach the poor to the extent desired. Look at the benefit incidence studies. I can cite some from sub-Saharan Africa, where the poorest quintile receives only, on average, about 13% of the benefits for government health spending, while the richest receive twice as much. Finally, my last point relates to the budgetary allocations. They typically reflect the priorities of the government. In some countries, governments may believe that increased spending on sanitation and health is the best way to improve health outcomes. If health sector spending is a priority, then this should be reflected in relatively higher allocation for health compared to other sectors. And what do we find? The countries generally allocate almost twice as much for education as for health. I don't know what is the reason, but that is the fact. Thank you.